Okay, good evening to all of you, to the distinguished gentlemen on the peanut gallery or the jury or whatever you want to call yourself, and to everybody online, scholars and lay people alike. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. My name is Simon Jacobson, and I welcome you all. And tonight's class is about music. The title of the class, Can You Hear Your Soul's Melody? And it's dedicated firstly to our good friend Philip. Happy birthday to him, in honor of his birthday. I also want to dedicate it to Eric, a good friend as well. Sent me an email before for Refuah Shlema for his father, Reuven ben Sarah. So with that being said, let me just give a small introduction. Okay? So far so good? Okay. I'm always intimidated when I see such pious and distinguished scholars. You know, usually one or two is one thing, but now we have a whole panel of them. And when you look at them, you could just see that there's like scholarship and piety and God emanating right out of them. You know, in New York especially, it's a phenomenon when they see Jews that look like Jews. And maybe that's a good introduction. You look Jewish too, but it's only your nose. You understand? And forehead maybe. Your grandparents looked like that probably somewhere. Great-grandparents. Abraham, however, didn't look like this. So it's a question exactly who's dressing like Abraham today. And if Abraham, Avram Avinu, the founder, or you could say the pioneer of all Judaism, and Moshe Rabbeinu, and some of the other great people, you've heard of them, right? If they were here today, would they be comfortable in the synagogues and in the institutions and the yeshivas that we go to? That would be an interesting question. Now, of course, Jews are good arguers, and meaning that every Jewish group will say, Abraham would be comfortable in my community, not in yours. Which that itself is a question whether Abraham would say that himself, because Abraham actually had an open tent for all communities. So any community that tries to have a monopoly on Abraham, I think, goes somewhat antithetical to Abraham. Abraham also is another interesting study that he happened to pray for infidels. So religious fanatics of any religion, whether it's Islam or Jewish or Christian, have to wonder when they feel that infidels, infidels meaning non-believers, should be stoned. The question is, what did Abraham do when he encountered infidels? So the Bible has a whole chapter and a whole story about it. How God first considers that he's going to conceal his plans from Abraham. Hashem Amar HaMachasani Avram, and then God says, no, I will not conceal them. How could I conceal it from the person that loves me so, that I have a relationship with? And he shares with Abraham his plan to destroy the wicked city of Sodom. And no one disagreed that they're a wicked city. Abraham didn't argue that as well. So you would think that the natural, what would be the instinctive and intuitive reaction that Abraham would have to God destroying the infidels, he should have breathed a sigh of relief and say, thank God, finally, justice in this world. We have so many complaints, like Job, Eov says, and others that complain and say the wicked prosper and the good suffer. Here, finally, the wicked are going to suffer. A man of faith should have celebrated. Instead, the Torah goes on and says a whole different story, that Abraham starts challenging God, which is why you understand why God didn't want to reveal it to him, because he knew he was going to get a hard time. And he starts challenging God, that how could you do this, and maybe there's some righteous people, maybe 50 righteous, 40 righteous, 30 righteous, a whole story. And he accuses God and saying, if you destroy the city, for history it will be known that the Shefet Kalar, the judge of the entire universe, was not doing justice. Which you have to ask yourself, it's a strange accusation. As I said, Sodom, till today when we use the word Sodom, it always refers to sin. So, Abraham knew that. Why was he blaming God for this? Why was he trying to save the city that was cruel in every possible way, and not just cruel between them and God? They were cruel to each other, and everyone agreed to that. And yet it's all documented, which makes it even stranger, because Abraham did not prevail, by the way. Sodom was destroyed. He prevailed. He was able to save his own nephew and family, but he didn't prevail. So why does the Torah have to document how a tzaddik, a great man, challenged God and then didn't win anyway. It's one thing if he would have prevailed, it'd be a lesson. So even though he didn't prevail, we still have to that's still documented how a man stood up, and did not only did he not stone and get in line to stone the infidels, he actually prayed for them. Now you could say he didn't pray directly for them, he prayed for the righteous among them, but basically he was trying to save the city. So this is Abraham. So if Abraham was here today, and he became the father Avraham and Goyim of all nations, of all religions, so you have to wonder how he would look at religious fanatics, or religious zealots, kanoim as they call them, people who are, whether they're in the spirit of Abraham or they're not in the spirit of Abraham. And I'm just throwing out as questions. I'm not making any conclusions. Everybody can come to their own conclusions. Shailas Chacham Chetzit Tshuva, they say, the question of a wise person is half an answer. Now, why am I saying this as an introduction? The truth is, you provoked it, because I looked at you and I was saying to myself, what would Avram Avinu say if he came to Bar Park or Geula or Williamsburg or Crown Heights or hundreds of other enclaves of Jewish communities? I'm sure there are a lot of things that are beautiful, and I'm not taking away the chesed and the love and the kindness, which is definitely a trait from Abraham, has permeated Jewish communities throughout history, and especially today. You see great chesed, and you go to any hospital, and you see the great efforts of what's called Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick and providing for them, or other charitable efforts. But on the other end of things, is still a certain, what can you say, there's a certain stereotype. And it's a very legitimate one. We'll call it in English, it's called dissonance. A big split between religious, everybody knows each other, beautiful. Between religious piety and refinement. That's the big thing. So there's a statement from the Ramban. It's a famous Nachmanides commentary in the book of Leviticus and Kedoshim, where the chapter begins, Kedoshim to you shall be sanctify yourselves. You shall be sacred, basically. A mitzvah in the Torah, you shall be sacred. So the Ramban, otherwise known as Nachmanides, asked the question, you have many times in the Torah this commandment, Viskadashtem, V'yisim Kedoshim, Kadeshim Atem, many places, earlier and later in the Torah. So why suddenly here is a unique commandment that you should sanctify yourself? And he answers, and this reminds you of someone who wrote this 1,000 years ago, when Judaism was a whole different state of affairs in Europe and so on, where assimilation was not yet born, and 99.9%, I would say, even practically every Jewish person was observant, whether maybe it wasn't by choice because they didn't have options. But the bottom line is, it was a different world, and yet Nachmanides writes the famous statement, which is that this commandment is coming to specifically address one particular element of sanctification, and that is the area of what he calls novel b'reshus haTorah, which means a person who's a manuvel. Let's say, how do you translate manuvel? Any good translations? Abanakshus, huh? No, that's not the word. Which college did you go to? Yeah. Yeah. So, obnoxious in the name of the Torah, novel b'reshus haTorah, which means somebody who uses the Torah not only not to be a more refined person, but actually justifies their obnoxious behavior, which is an absolutely possible thing. And this Nachmanides, as I said, over almost 1,000 years ago, writes this. So the Torah is coming to specifically address this challenge. Kedoshim to you, sanctify yourself and do not be obnoxious in the name of the Torah. I have to deal with this quite often because on one hand, I myself grew up in a very traditional world, Jewish traditional world, and I wear beard and a yarmulke, and definitely project certain images. At the same time, most of my activity and involvement is with people that are called secular, not in the religious community. And so I would say 35 years of hard-earned experience of the stereotypes that are hurled and the attitudes to religion. So besides what you read about and what you see in Woody Allen movies and the media and so on, I personally experienced it because even when people get to know me and we have a good relationship, they say, okay, you're an exception. But every religious Jew I know, some of them are nice, but most of them I can't trust. I don't see someone that's more religious being more refined, more godly. And I am not a person who's going to lie and justify something which I agree with. My only answer to that is that you have to remember, just because people dress a certain way, or they were programmed a certain way, there are devout Catholics, there are devout Jews, and there are devout Muslims. I know some people want me to say lahavdil, I'll say lahavdil for those that need that. But that means they could be programmed that way. It doesn't mean necessarily that has anything to do with their choice. People can be programmed a certain way, what's called mechanical Judaism. And the Torah itself has this category for it. It's called mitzvahs anoshim milumada. Yeshaya, the prophet, bemoans the fact that people who do things mechanically, God himself says, I despise people who are mechanical. Imagine being in a relationship with someone, you just do it to be mechanical. So it's one thing, once in a while you have to be an automatic pilot, because that's how it is. You're not always in the mood of a relationship with someone you love or care about. But if you're always that way, it is an insult to the relationship. It means it's lost its soul. It's just something you do out of duty or obligation or guilt, or not to hurt anyone, as some people put it. And in the Torah, especially if you read the Haftarah of Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, of all Shabbos is the saddest time of the year, just read how God speaks about the prayers and the offerings and the mitzvahs of people who do it without a soul. He says, I'd rather not have it all than doing it without a heart and soul. So you can argue, halachically, some will argue that it's better to do it than not. But that Haftarah, clearly God says, I'd rather you don't do it than do it mechanically. So I'm not going to get into a debate at the end of the day, is it better to do something even if you do it just like a machine or a puppet or a robot, or not to do it. But clearly there are statements in the Torah not coming from a rabbi and not coming from any human being, but from God himself, that despises this type of behavior. So yes, we have on the other end of things, we say that the concept in Judaism that everyone does things for ulterior motives. You're not going to find someone that has pure intent. Maimonides himself says at the end of the laws of Tshuva that only Abraham himself was the only one called Avram Eyavi, Abraham my beloved, because he was the only one that is, in the words of Rambam and Maimonides, he did truth, he was committed to truth because it was true. Everyone else, as he explains there, does it for some motive. Some material gain, some spiritual gain, even gain the world to come, or other reasons are ulterior motive. Yet the Torah still allows for that, because that's how life is. Children, you give them a gift, a prize as a motivation, an incentive to do something good. And you hope as they get older they will do it, not just for the incentive, but also for the thing itself. And when we're adults, we also need incentives. So there's nothing wrong per se, but if you only remain stuck in the incentive and you think that's the way it is, to know that God makes it very clear it's not the way it is. Now what does all this have to do with music and melody and Shabbos Shira and song? Well, it has everything to do with it. In the book of Psalms, King David says an expression, Zmiris hayuli chukecha, that your laws are like songs to me. So the question is like this, and I say this question across the board to myself and everybody, whether you grew up in a traditional environment or in a completely non-one, or in a secular one, or a skeptical one, or an anti-religious one, doesn't really matter. The question is, can a religious experience and a spiritual experience, do we experience it like music, or do we experience it like a burden, basically? So I can't resist telling the story, which I've shared more than once here, about a woman in Santa Cruz, California. So anybody's been to Santa Cruz around here? Anybody's heard of Santa Cruz? Even you too have not been there? That's not. I thought you were like, well, you have a long life ahead of you. So one of your journeys, make sure you stop in Santa Cruz, okay? So Santa Cruz is like an hour south of San Francisco, and it's like situated between the Pacific Ocean and the mountains. It has its own particular climate. Very interesting place. For those that have more maybe spiritual sensitivity, it's one of those places they call a vortex. Like Sedona or Jerusalem, or Tzfas. So there's another one, Santa Cruz, to some extent. It has its own particular environment. And people there are very laid back. They're like, I'm a hardcore New Yorker. I was born here. So this is like antithetical to New York in every possible way. There, nobody seems to have a job. Nobody seems to be doing anything, frankly. It's like they roam about, a lot of young people. And I saw a bunch of young men and women. I mean, this is, when I was there, it was talking about over 10 years ago. And I asked them, what are they doing? Are they waiting are they online to see a movie? What are they all hanging? They said, no, they're in bliss. They're in bliss. Which, I don't know if it was with foreign substances or natural or not, but doesn't really matter. Bottom line is, it's a very calm place. And very interesting, a lot of Jews there, seekers. So I spoke at a bookstore in the evening called Gateways. Not to confuse with other Gateways. This is Gateways, a New Age bookstore. And it was a very, I remember, memorable evening because everyone there did not have to be, you did not have to go through the preliminary and prerequisite introductions about soul and spirit. These were people who were seekers. They were refined people who had paid their dues, and many of them were very spiritual, and it was easy to speak to them. Let's put it that way. So we had this. I gave my talk, back and forth, and was, as I said, very laid back. People were sitting on the carpet and the floor. It was a very comfortable and informal setting, which was my preference as well. And at the end of the evening, so there were questions and answers, and a woman gets up, and she asks this following question. She said, I grew up, these were her words, in Borough Park. I don't say this because some of you are from Borough Park. It just happens to be connected to this theme tonight. I'm from Borough Park. And I went to Beshalach school. And everybody was surprised because they probably knew her, and no one knew that was her background. And she said, when I was a teenager, and I went to schools, my very religious family, she didn't say her name. I mean, I know who she is now, but at the time she didn't say. And she said, I went to all these religious schools, and my soul was always hungry. I was always looking for something, and I couldn't find it in the Judaism that was being taught. And every time I would ask questions, I was silenced. I was always silenced. I was silenced. They're saying, stop asking questions, be just a good Yiddish meidele, grow up like your mother, your grandmother. And she said, my home, it's particularly, my parents were angry people. My mother was angry, my father was even angrier. And it was not an environment that was very conducive to anything that was nurturing and soulful. At the time, she said, I didn't really know what I was looking for. I just knew this was not it. And the more I asked, the more angry people got at me and would punish me literally with silencing me or seeing me as a bad person. And she said, I wasn't rebellious in any technical way, I just asked questions. At 17 years old, this is her words, I'll never forget it. Because everybody hushed when they heard it. She said, at 17 years old, my soul was asphyxiated, which means choked. I couldn't breathe anymore. And I decided to leave. I could not live there any longer. And I left. I went to California, to the West Coast. My parents surely sat shiva for me and mourned my leaving. And I wandered about. From the way she described it, it sounded like the end of the 60s or early 70s when she went to the West Coast. Went to Los Angeles first, and then ended up in San Francisco, in the Haight-Ashbury world. And then I finally settled here in Santa Cruz. It sounded like over 25 years earlier, maybe 20 years. And I found my God. And this is what she said. I found God in Zen Buddhism and in LSD. That's where I found it. And I found my peace. I never made contact with my parents. I don't want to hurt them. It's better for them to see me as dead. Maybe that's the best thing. So be it. But I'm at peace here, and I live here. And I found my God. And I haven't seen, she says, a rabbi like you in all these years. I never went back. And you stand here in Santa Cruz, in my world, and you speak about God and the soul in a very comfortable way that I wish I would have heard years ago. She said, where'd you get this stuff? It's not they didn't teach it in my school. The rabbis I knew didn't know this. I know they didn't. So what do you say? And I see when she asked the question, I saw others also perked up their ears, and I saw that this was a question on many people's mind. So I said, let me put it to you this way. We Jews have this thing called a 613-step program. So, she laughed, as did others, and she said, okay, I understand. And then afterwards, they stayed around, she and maybe another 7, 8 people, and we just had this long conversation until maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a very interesting conversation. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I want to just touch upon 1 or 2 things, which is why I'm telling the story. So, I said to her, look, and I said to the others as well, each one had their own story, not all exactly as dramatic as that, but everyone had their disillusionment and some discovery. And they were very good people. I mean, people who I saw, they worked on themselves. They were not looking for excuses. She was not a person who was like looking not to be religious or something. She really was seeking. She's a true seeker. And I said to her, look, I cannot judge you. And I'm not in your shoes. And I don't know how I would react if I was asphyxiated as you are and starving. Maybe I would have reacted worse than you did. So I'm not here to in any way question. But I will tell you this, that what you rejected was maybe correct to reject because it did not speak to you. But unfortunately, they only told you half the story. They never told you about the other half of Judaism. It's like they told you about the body, about the mechanics, and that made no sense to you, And you were not one of those that was just going to buy into it because everybody's doing it, or out of guilt and so on. But there's another half to the story, and I said I want to share you a parable that I once heard. The parable I once heard was this: when God created the nightingale is a bird with a beautiful voice that sings. Hence the Shabbos Shira connection. It sings. So nightingale came, nobody's ever happy even with their gifts. So the nightingale came to God and said, thank you for the beautiful voice you gave me, a voice that lifts up my own spirit and the spirits of everyone around me. However, it also makes me very vulnerable because I attract attention. And I could be perched on a branch singing a lullaby, and the predator who's hungry, very hungry for a piece of meat, a piece of food, is going to come by, not being irritated maybe by the song, and just grab me and eat, because I will attract attention. So God, please give me something to protect myself with, some protection from predators, from enemies. So God offered the bird a beak. A beak is a sharp nose with a sharp edge that can protect. Some birds have that as a protection. When the bird inspected the merchandise, the bird said, no. An elegant bird like me with a nose like that, no. Okay. So God then said, okay, I'll give you a set of claws. And God offered the bird claws. So claws again are, another way of protecting. Other animals and birds have claws. And again, the bird rejected it for the same reason. It's unbecoming. Such claws. I'm going to, I don't know if birds have manicures or not, but bottom line, the bird didn't want it. So finally God says to the bird, okay, I will give you a set of wings, what's called in Hebrew, knafayim, wings. And the bird looked at the wings and never saw wings before. So the bird said, I don't understand. You're the master of the universe. You created the world with such design and wisdom. I have enough body weight to carry with me to run from my predators. And here you're giving me 2 more pieces of flesh, which just adds more body weight. It'll make it more difficult for me to run. What's the benefit of these 2 pieces of flesh on each side of my body? So God, of course, said to the bird, little bird, no. These are called wings. These are called wings. I will teach you how to fly with them. And when you can fly, you can soar away and escape any of your enemies. So I told this woman and the other few people who were sitting there, I said, look, one of the saddest things in life is to see a bird that's grounded. A bird that can't fly. For whatever reason, damaged wings or frozen or whatever it is. What's even sadder is to see a bird with wings and doesn't know it can fly. Judaism is a very complex system, and it's one that has lasted for thousands of years. And unfortunately, what we are left with is the body weight. Everybody knows the body. Fikach hirbelehem Torah mitzvahs. A lot of Torah mitzvahs. If you're familiar, most of people are not even familiar with the extent of the regulation of Judaism about everything in life. Literally everything, from how you wake up to how you go to sleep, even how you cut your nails, even what shoelace to tie first, in the right or the left shoe. Not even getting into the laws of Shabbos and kosher and Passover. It's like obsession with details. And if you study Talmud, the nuances of every detail is unbelievable. You could either think this is absolutely divine or absolutely insane, if you're a skeptic, because it's so much detail. And yes, so if you're in the legal world, or you ever looked at a contract, who's going to look? You ever look at a mortgage? Just who goes through all those pages? That's why you have lawyers for these things. That's how intricate the Talmud is. It's legal documents. So when you're buying a house, you need to cover all the bases. So technically, you could say the same thing as the Torah. The Talmud has to cover every base. So the details are necessary for that purpose. But remember, when you're buying a house, it's just about buying a house. The Judaism also demands things of you, how to live your life. Everything is regulated. And if you look at it purely from that level, it's a lot of body weight. A lot of body weight. Who needs so much body weight? So yes, some people do it out of guilt, or just plain, as I said, being programmed, or because they don't have the courage to try other options. We're all conformists at the end of the day. The whole world is conformists. Some are religious conformists, some are non-religious conformists. You have very few people that are true pioneers. I mean, everybody likes to think that they're out of the box. But if it was so common, then it wouldn't be something special to be out of the box. So yes, I always ask a group of people, I say, so any conformists here, raise your hands. Nobody ever raises their hands. So there's 6 billion non-conformists in this world. So we're the conformists exactly. Oh, 1. There we go. So the point is that when it's pure body weight, yes, so who needs it? But what happens if someone were to train a person and say, 1 second, these may be techniques that help a person fly to places they can never reach on their own. So then, yes, it's more body weight, absolutely. Wings make a bird weigh more than a bird without wings, but wings also make a bird fly. And anyone who's ever learned, for example, let's talk about music and song, musical theory, or musical instrument, notes. It's very tedious when you're taking lessons and trying to learn how to read notes. Look at a book of notes, musical notes. If you don't know how to play music, it's pure gibberish. So why do you think it's, for many people looking into Chumash is not pure gibberish? It's also gibberish. It's in Hebrew. But they don't see the music in it. If you saw musical notes, you'd never know that this can create the most majestic sounds, that can transport a person to another time and place, that can bring somebody from a sadness to the deepest joy, that can lift somebody and touch them in the deepest possible way. Because you look at notes, they're just notes. And then when you see how people are trained, it's very mechanical. It's extremely mechanical. But when you hear the results and you see what comes out of it, you suddenly realize that this structure, all these details, also can create unbelievable music. So then you understand somewhat when a person like King David says, that the mitzvahs, for him like music and songs, if mitzvahs were like songs, I think everybody would embrace them. But they don't hear them as music. You don't hear music being played. You don't hear the soul being lifted to the highest possible places. We're told in books that there are people that can do that. We believe it, maybe we don't believe it. But you can do that practically. When a person stands, for example, hearing the Torah reading in the Shabbos in the synagogue, and every letter is precisely read, you feel sore. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's all negative, but you don't find this, the spiritual flight that is talked about in music, as in rituals. You just don't find it. As a matter of fact, many people say it's not even real. I know myself, giving a class here years ago, someone came to the class and I was talking about spirituality, and he came over to me. He was a Hamish Jew, meaning he went to the yeshiva system. He said to me, "Where'd you get this new spirituality thing? This is from New Age. It's possible to talk about it." That's what he was trying to convince me. So I said, "So what are you doing here?" "Oh, I didn't invite you." You know. He didn't know that I was going to be talking about spirituality. What was he thinking? It was going to be a halacha class. You can go elsewhere for that. So I said, "You ever hear of a thing called ruchnius?" Now, that's not spirituality. By him, ruchnius was a mashgiach in a kitchen. The cook is the gashmius, and the mashgiach, ruchni, is the person who makes sure that it's kosher. That's what him ruchni is. You know, I said to him, and what about in the morning when you say Moida Ani and Neshomesh and Shachzatu bin Nishmasi? What does that mean? What's Nishmasi? He says, now you're getting into Kabbalah. That's what he told me. So we say Moida Ani with our children. He doesn't want to learn it until he's after 80 or 40 or whatever the age is. Anyway, the point, I'm not trying to make fun, I'm not mentioning his name, but there's a lot of people like this. And then you say, Neshama shenasati bitahirihi atabaros. I'm not even getting into somebody that knows the basics, that there's a thing called primis hatera, there's an inner soul to the Torah, and someone who accepts the Zohar and the Arizal and the hundreds of and thousands of Kabbalists who are as legitimate as Talmudic scholars, just like a person like Rab Shimon Bar Yochai and so on. So anyone familiar with traditional Judaism knows that there's two parts to Torah. There's the body of Torah and the soul of Torah. It is true the soul of Torah was always kept more concealed, was not taught in public, and so on and so forth. But frankly, today, without it, you probably cannot survive really to be a soulful Jew without it. You could be a mechanical one, and you can go through the motions, but without the music today, it's impossible for a person who's a seeker and a person who thinks a person with an open mind. It's impossible to maintain a passionate connection to Judaism without the soul of it. Now, the fact is that once upon a time it wasn't taught. Whatever the reasons are, that's not the scope of this discussion here. Why it wasn't or wasn't. The question is, it's the same Torah that was given at Sinai. What do you think? When Moses was standing in Sinai and they heard voices and sounds, and Abraham had visions of God, what is that? Physical experiences? These were spiritual experiences. It was completely about the soul. And that's even the simple ABCs of biblical reading. So to go back to the music part, this is what I told her. I wanted to tell you the end of the story with this woman. So then, finally, after building up my courage and saying what I have to say, I said to her, you know something? I understand you found your soul and you found God, but I'll tell you something even more. If you were a real free spirit and you really were a pioneer, you'd move back to Borough Park and maybe go undercover, because they'll excommunicate you probably if you don't, and maybe find girls that are 17 years old like you are and teach them what you learned. Teach them that you can find this in Judaism. And I said, what you did was you became a selfish spiritual person. There's also, you can be spiritually selfish too, which means it's about you. I didn't say it in an aggressive or in a critical way. She understood what I meant, and I said it in a kind way. But I said, what you're doing is taking care of yourself and your life. I mean, if you're a true soul, you know that the soul also has a certain mission and obligation to play music with others, and not just you. We're all musical notes in a large composition, and we all need each other to play the greater music. Anyway, she told me politely she'll consider it, and she's still considering it. But from time to time, I send her a jab in the email. At this point, I make her a little uncomfortable. I'm saying Borough Park is still waiting for you. I mean just Borough Park, she could stay in California and do the same thing. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Everyone has their story. The reason I told it is because even though in her case it was a particular, she may be watching, so I know I have permission from her to tell the story. So, and the reason I say it is because every person in this world maybe doesn't have the story exactly like this, but you could apply the same story to everybody's history, everybody's life. As I said, today you have probably 80% of the Jewish people are non-observant. What I mean by that is, I didn't say that they're necessarily far from God than so-called observant people, but technically, mostly due to lack of knowledge, don't know about Shabbat or kosher or many of the laws of Judaism. And it's mostly lack of education and lack of knowledge. Many, of course, have the stereotype, which is very legitimate, that when they see people who are knowledgeable, they don't necessarily respect them. And you have this, people who very openly will say very clearly, the more religious somebody is, the less spiritual they are. The more spiritual often is less religious. So you start wondering, is this built in that way? Because statistics are statistics. In the United States, they have surveys that show that 90% of Americans will say that they have some belief in God, and they have some spirituality in their lives. 40% will say that they're affiliated to a particular religion. That's not a small discrepancy. That's 50% discrepancy. So even if there's some errors in the numbers, it's a pretty big difference. What you conclude from that is that people don't associate religious ritual with spirituality, with soul, basically. They're two different worlds. Religion is seen as certain commitment to dogmatic behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean bad, but it's a certain commitment to a certain system of behaviors, maybe connected to affiliation in a synagogue or in a religious institution, or some other type of commitments of that level. Whereas spirituality is seen as a free spirit who experiences something soulful beyond that. The truth is, the tragedy is that that's absolutely incorrect in academically speaking. It's true in the numbers. Judaism always knew, as I said before, the Zohar says it, the Beshalach says it, hundreds and hundreds of holy books say it, that Judaism is a body and a soul. A body without a soul is a corpse, and a soul without a body is not grounded on this earth. And all of Judaism is built on a fusion of body and soul. Sometimes the words are, they say, tefillah, b'lei kavana, is keguf b'lei neshama. Prayer without intention is like a body without a soul. But if you broaden the idea, is that everything is an experience, is supposed to be an experience of both of them. And you need both. Why do you need the body part? Because we live in a material world. In the spiritual worlds, in spiritual world there are no mitzvahs. You cannot perform a mitzvah in the spiritual worlds. You can study Torah, but you can't do a mitzvah. The mitzvah is based on some physical parameters. There's no charity in the spiritual worlds, monetary charity. There's a spiritual type of giving. But mitzvahs that are grounded on this earth are in this material world. At the same time, the action without the soul is, as I said, unfortunately, it's like a corpse. It's empty. Is it better than nothing? I mentioned earlier. That's a debate. Some saying some mitzvahs it's better than nothing. Some mitzvahs it's actually worse than nothing. Depends. For example, charity is known that even if you don't have intention, the fact that you help someone else doesn't matter what your intention is. Even if you have bad intentions, you help somebody, so you perform the mitzvah. Obviously, there's a higher level of mitzvah to do it with a smile, to do it with the right intention. But even if the worst, even the lowest end of the spectrum, someone loses a few dollars in the street, and a poor person finds it and uses it, even if the person who lost it would know that someone is being helped, says, no, I don't want to give it to them. I'm not miyayish, I'm not giving up on it, it's mine. The fact is, since that person benefited, that you get the mitzvah of charity. That's charity, because charity is very grounded in, bottom line, helping another. As I said, there are levels of, obviously. But then there are mitzvahs that are absolutely, completely cancelled. For example, bringing an offering in the temple without the right intention is actually a sin. You have to bring another offering to atone for it. So there are mitzvahs without intention, without a spirit in it, that are actually considered to be absolutely unacceptable. And then there's in between, many levels. But obviously I'm broadening this into a broader subject, into hearing the music of it. Now, to be honest, when I was a teenager and I was going to yeshiva, I didn't have quite the experience that woman in Santa Cruz had, but I identify completely where she's coming from, because I saw similar things in my own faculty, my own yeshiva, and so on. But thank God, I continued to explore, and I knew that the grass is always greener on the other side. So I could spend the next 90 years of my life searching for spirituality in India or any other part of the world. And I'm sure they all have beautiful stuff to offer. And I felt that I had to look, at least to be, with my own integrity, to be honest, I had to see whether it's in Judaism or not. And I'm talking now as a skeptic. So I threw myself into the books. I didn't want to trust people. So I wanted to see, I did read the books. Can you see it in the books? Because the books, Jews love books. That's undeniable. We have books that go back thousands of years. Some say the Sefer Yetzirah, the first, well, some say it's the first work of Kabbalah, was written by Abraham. Others feel that there's a book even prior to that, written by Adam. It's called Rizil HaMalach. They're both very cryptic and almost impossible to understand on their own, but they exist. Regardless what the opinions are, but they're definitely not a century old. They're thousands of years old. And then the Zohar and other books. So I wanted to see what is there. And whether, if Rashi was here today, Moses and Abraham, and we were able to speak to them, would they be struggling with the same questions we have? What would they say to a woman like in Santa Cruz who says, my soul is asphyxiated? As I said before, Abraham definitely would not excommunicate her. Even Sodom, which was much worse than that, he didn't do that. So I wanted to see it in my own possible way, and I thank God I was able to find what I found. I'm not saying this to persuade anybody. I'm just sharing my own personal experience. That when you understand the soul of it, it's absolutely like music, even greater than music. And I'm musical myself, so I know what music is. Music, they identify with soul. Do you think it's an accident today that young people are drawn to music? You know, why is it like 300 years ago, they were also classic artists, and you don't find music to be such a youth industry, literally that mesmerizes, captivates a whole generation. Okay, so you can say hundreds of years ago they didn't have the technologies, you had to be wealthy or an aristocrat to be able to hear the music of the greats, of Bach and or Beethoven or Chopin and so on. But it's much more than that. It's because, and this is my own little theory, but I have no doubt it's a vacuum. When there's a deep vacuum for soul, you're going to find it one way or another. Young people are very spontaneous, energetic, and hungry for soul. And you don't find it in their synagogues. And in their religious institutions, they look elsewhere. Music today, no question, is like a prayer for people. And a rock concert is a cathedral. And when you hear especially people, and I've spoken to people, I've spoken to people intently who are into that whole scene, there's no question, you hear about them, they speak about it with the fervor that religious people speak. So this is not a question whether it's positive or negative. The bottom line is there's a hunger. And when the soul is hungry, it's going to find its way. And do you think, a few months ago I was speaking to a group of therapists who deal with teens at risk. Different boys and girls involved with whether it's drugs or alcohol or other addictions. And it was professionals. They wanted to get my take on it. So I gave a talk at an event at a conference they had. And the interesting thing is, around a year ago, I gave a similar talk to people who are at risk themselves, a bunch of teenagers that I had access to. So I said actually the same thing to both talks. And I told them, I said, I gave a talk like this, and I asked the teenagers, what is their greatest enemy? And many of them acknowledge clearly they're in trouble, or else they wouldn't come to this. They're in trouble. They can't get out of their drugs or alcohol or gambling or a lot of different addictions, sexual addictions and stuff like that. And I asked, what do you think is your biggest enemy, the root of your challenges? And everyone said different things. Peer pressure and obviously availability today is so easy. What I submitted to them, and some of them actually said it, but I said it in my own words. I said, I'll tell you what I think is your worst enemy. Boredom, monotony, emptiness. That when you're bored and you have a fire burning inside of you, you look to feed it. It's like, think of somebody who's in a desert and hasn't drunk water for days. Or anyone in a situation that they're parched or they're extremely thirsty or hungry. What are you going to do? You're desperate at that point. You may not call yourself desperate, but you act like you're desperate. And what you do is, you find anything to quench your thirst. Even if it's poisonous, even if it's dangerous. Obviously, if it's poisonous and killed you immediately, even that is possible. But especially something you don't see in immediate, it's an impact. It satisfies a need. And I said this to the professionals as well. And I said, it all begins with a vacuum. It never begins. There's no person on earth that wants to be addicted to something. It doesn't work that way. It goes against dignity, human dignity. Who wants to be dependent on something? Not an object, not on people. You don't want to be dependent. People by nature don't want to be dependent, especially addicted, that you can't control yourself. So you're not addicted to the thing, you're addicted to the hunger that it feeds. And that becomes uncontrollable, to the point that it can be destructive, self-destructive. And you should know, and I told them, I said, you can do studies. I'm not speaking to you as a professional. I speak from experience and from my own background. You can see the people that are most addictive personalities are the most passionate of all people. And usually the most creative. The people who have biggest hunger are the ones that get most addicted. Mediocre people don't get addicted to things because in the first place they don't have so much hunger. So it's interesting. That's how it is. It's if you want, it's a Beferish Talmud as well. It says in the Gemara, in the Talmud, Kol hagodl mechavere yitzrei godl mimeno. The greater the person, the greater the Yetzer Hara, the greater the inclination, the evil inclination. Well, now why is that the case? It's because with his greatness, there's always greatness in all directions. If it's not channeled, it'll be destructive. The greatest people in history, the greatest destroyers in history were the greatest people with power. Someone that doesn't have charisma or power and so on can be very destructive. I mean, everybody can burn down a building. I don't mean it that way. But I mean in a methodical way, in a way that influences millions of people. It's usually someone that has a lot of energy and a lot of power, to the point that it can be demonic. I'm not going to mention names. I'm not going to mention names through history, but you could just fill in the blanks. So the point is that there's a hunger, and as we come now, this weekend is the Shabbos called Shabbos Shira, Shabbos of song. Why is it called the Shabbos Shira, the song? Because in this this is the first documented song, maybe in any document in history. The first documented song is Az Yasher Meisher B'nai Yisrael, the song that Moses and the Jewish people sang at the sea. It's called the Song of the Sea, Shiras Hayam. What happened was that after they left Egypt, the story goes, they came to the sea. They were actually led to the sea, and suddenly Pharaoh, of course, had a change of heart, and he decided he's pursuing the Jews. So now the Jews look back, they see the Egyptians pursuing them. In front of them is the sea. They're stuck for the first time in history between what they call a rock and a hard place. And how do you get out of this? Where do you go? What do you do? It's like going from one thing worse than the next. And the continuing story is that miraculously the sea parted. There are details to the story, but after it parted, they walked through the sea. When the Egyptians followed them, the seas closed up again, and they were all killed, except Pharaoh. And as the Jews were standing on the other side of the water, that's when they sang the song, Shiras Hayam. They sang praise, and it becomes so fundamental in Judaism that we actually say it every day in the prayer, the morning prayer. And it's known as the famous song. It was done, actually the day that it happened is the seventh day of Passover. So we read it this week in the chapter, but when it happened in history was 7 days after they left Egypt. And this story everyone grows up with, you know it, back and forth. There's of course all the different debates about those that believe that it happened, those that didn't believe it happened. That's not what I'm going to discuss here. The question really is, and usually as I try to address in this discussion here, like I said earlier, this is the body of the story. What's the soul of the story? The body of the story is that 3,321 years ago, that's to be exact, the year 2,448 in the Jewish calendar, it's 3,221 years ago, the Jews left Egypt, the famous Exodus, and the story happened exactly as I just told it, as documented in this week's chapter. Okay, then the question, of course, is, who cares? Why do we need to know this? Why is it relevant to us? Both the parting of the sea and the song. I mean, it happened. Right? We wouldn't be here today as a nation had that not happened. That's true. So, in a type of nostalgia or a type of historical document, we know the fact. But clearly, that is not enough to, as I said before, to awaken a soul and allow it to soar. Where are the wings in the story? The music in the story. Of course, it's a song, so there's music in it. But the music in our lives. If your child asked you a very blunt question, how does this story change my life? And how would I be different if I didn't know this happened? What would you answer? And you may think that question is sacrilegious or like inappropriate. That's absolutely not correct. The Torah above all is meant to be a directive, a blueprint for life. There's not even a mitzvah in this story. If it was a mitzvah, you could say this. So there are lessons, for example, in the Talmud it says, we learn from this, that when a miracle happens to you, you should say praise. You should say thank you. You shouldn't take for granted gifts that come to you. Okay, that's a lesson, an appropriate lesson. That's why Cheskia, when he didn't say praise for a miracle that happened to him, so God said that he could have been Messiah, Mashiach, because he didn't say praise. So that's definitely a relevant lesson to us all, that we all have our gifts, and you should acknowledge them. But that's a general lesson. You don't need to go through all the details. At the same time, we also say that in every generation, chol der v'der, and some add every day, a person has to visualize as if they just left Egypt. This is a statement in the Talmud. And that's why you have every day at the end of the prayer, morning prayer, the Sheish, we remember the leaving of Egypt. And I don't know, I've never made a count, but countless times in the prayers and mitzvahs are all connected to remembering that we left the Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, Tefillin, Tzitzis, even Shabbos. So many things that we remember. So once a year, by the Seder, Passover, of course we remember. But it's said every day. And some feel it's a mitzvah every day to remember we left Egypt. Which only compounds the question, why? Why is it so important? And what does it mean that you left Egypt? It's one thing you should learn the lessons from leaving Egypt. We didn't leave Egypt physically ourselves. Our ancestors did. Most of us have never been to Egypt. And as a matter of fact, some laws even say you're not allowed to return to Egypt, based on this week's chapter. Moses says to them, you'll never see Egypt again. So there are questions about that, because Maimonides and many others did end up in Egypt. So there's discussions how that's possible. But the bottom line is, the statement is, B'chol chayev adam liris es atzmei, a person is responsible to visualize, envision as if he left Egypt today in every generation. How do you explain that statement? I can't see any explanation on the body level without understanding the soul of Egypt. There's no way to explain it. And there are hundreds of examples of it. The only answer is a very simple one. When you understand, as some of the Kabbalists say, the Torah, they say, does not talk about things down here and alludes to things up there. It talks about things up there and alludes to things down here. This is a direct quote from the Shalah, the Rameh, and some others that say, the Torah is not medaberes b'tachtenim or meramezes b'elyenim. The Torah is medaberes b'elyenim or meramezes b'tachtenim. This is an expression that the Torah talks is a spiritual book. If it's divine wisdom, it's a divine blueprint. It pre-exists creation, and therefore it's a spiritual entity. And then it evolved into a material, historical document. Which explains also, how is it possible it says that our forefathers Kimu kol haTorah, they kept the entire Torah before it was given. What does that mean? Yes, charity makes sense. But how could they exactly keep mitzvahs that happen only as a result of leaving Egypt? For example, what did they do Passover night? They sat at a Seder and ate matzah? When the Jews had not yet been in Egypt and matzah wasn't even created yet? So how do you explain so many mitzvahs, so many parts of Judaism? There's no way they could have kept it mechanically as we keep it today. And the main answer given for it is that they kept it spiritually. What that means is that this Torah, which precedes existence, Alpayim Shana Kod Meter Le'olam, has all the stories in it. Story of leaving Egypt. But they didn't leave Egypt till, as I said, the year 2448. So what exactly did Adam and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, what did they know? What did they understand? They understood the soul of it. What is the soul of it? The word Mitzrayim in Hebrew comes from the word constraints, limitations. That always existed. As soon as God created, as the Arizal says, the first great symptom, as soon as created existence, the first Meitzar was created. The first concealment is the first boundary. It's still on a cosmic level, but like everything starts from a root and then becomes a symptom. So in the root of it all, it began in the beginning. That's why you'll find that everything is associated back to the eating of the tree of knowledge. Even the sin of the golden calf, even everything we do today, all a result of what happened in the Garden of Eden. Because on a cosmic level, that's when was the first so-called Mitzrayim. It didn't yet manifest in a country called Mitzrayim, Egypt. And it didn't yet manifest in a physical nation being enslaved and then leaving. But on a spiritual sense, as soon as God created existence, He created a Mitzrayim. And He placed a soul into this constrained world and said, your mission is to free yourself from this place. Of course the forefathers knew that. It's the whole purpose of existence. They knew that we come down to this world with the divine is concealed, the spirit is concealed, and the goal is to free ourselves. So they definitely in some way honored that. Whether they honored it actually sitting at a Seder, probably not. But the spirit of it, they definitely know. And same thing with every part of the Torah. It says in the Zohar that when when Jacob was breeding the sheep and using the different maklis, the different rods, different colors, the Zohar says that was a symbol of tefillin. But tefillin is a direct result, it says clearly, when they left Egypt. Because the spirit of tefillin was there. The idea of binding your mind and your heart. The idea of connecting, as I said, to something. Oh, of course it didn't have a parchment that said chapters that we just left Egypt, because they didn't leave Egypt yet. They probably didn't even know that. Abraham was told that the Jews would be in a country that's not their own. Now, what I'm saying here may sound radical to some people. They never heard something like this. This is ABCs of Judaism, to be very honest. They just don't teach it in yeshiva. Because they teach us the body. They teach us the technical, historical fact. But let's put it bluntly. If the Torah is a book of God, it means it is a divine blueprint. It's divine wisdom. And there are many midrashim and Talmudic statements that support it and state very clearly that God used the Torah as a blueprint to create the universe. Not the other way around, that first he created a universe and then he decided to create rules how you live in this universe. An engineer first writes the manual before he builds the machine. And then when he gives you the machine, he gives you the manual. This is how you should use this machine. God first had a plan. That plan is the Torah, it's the blueprint. And then he created a universe following that blueprint, and then gives us the Torah to align the universe to the plan, basically. As the Zohar says, Istako baraisa bara alma. He looked into the Torah and he created the universe. And the second half is that we too look in the Torah and we kayim alma, and we preserve the universe. So basically it comes down to this, that every technique, so to speak, every method in the Torah is music. It teaches us how to play music. It's not about ritual alone. It's about how to align the machine called life with the plan, with a higher plan. And when you know that, it takes on a whole different richness and a whole different purpose. It's not just you're doing things. You're going through motions. You actually change the universe through your behavior. Now, you need to learn, obviously, the inner Torah, what's called Primis HaTorah. Originally Kabbalah, Tarei Chassidus, to understand how each mitzvah the music is released through every mitzvah. But every mitzvah releases music. Unfortunately, and let's say Shabbos is a day of music. Zmiris, we sing on Shabbos. Why is Shabbos associated with music, with song? Because Shabbos is a spiritual day. But sadly, you go into many homes on Shabbos, and it's a very boring day. Many people can't wait till Shabbos is over. So some even say that's where Saturday Night Fever grew out. A bunch of repressed Jews couldn't wait till Shabbos was over, so Saturday night came, they started partying. Now, of course, and then when you grow up in, let's say, even a traditional environment, so you have on Shabbos the rituals, the same chant and the same songs and the same mechanics. At some point, when you do something too many times again and again, it kills the soul in it. And even the same songs, interestingly. You sing the same song too many times, it becomes almost like you're doing it to be Yaitz, as they say. So you're doing it just to do it. In Judaism, every time you do a mitzvah, every time you say Shema, so it's the same words, Hear, O Israel, God is one. But we say it with such lip service. Every time you say it, you're supposed to say it with a different intention, with a different kavanah. So you say, so then why can't I just, as people ask me, why can't I just pray to God with my own words? I don't read Hebrew, I don't know Hebrew. Or even if I know Hebrew, it's much easier just to speak spontaneously, whatever I need. If God's my father, my mother, why can't I just go and say, I need this, I need that, and that's it? In truth is, you could. It doesn't say anywhere you can't. Prayer is from the heart. Aveda Shebelev, service of the heart. And yet we're still told, best is to pray according to the actual Hebrew prayers. And you say, and it almost takes away. It's one thing, studying Torah, you could say, okay, I don't know the information, I can't make up my own ideas. So I have to read what it says in the book. But prayer is from the heart. You're asking God for your needs. I know what my needs are. I'll say them any way I like to say them. And God can't understand my language. And it's a very basic question. Simple, a klotz kasha. And the answer is actually in a medrash that says the following, that when King David sang his psalms to God for his needs, then he says, we say right in the beginning of Psalms, there's a verse that says, Hila rotzen imre fi. May it be your will, he says to God, that the words that I have said to you in my lifetime, that I sang to you, that I prayed to you, should become imre fi, should become the words that Jews throughout history will say. And God considered and then granted his request. Had he not granted the request, so King David's words would have remained his own private prayer. And I'm sure through generations we have hundreds and thousands of prayers that great men and women said to God that didn't become part of anyone's prayer. They remain their own personal prayer. We know every prayer Moses said to God. Some are documented, some we don't know. It says 515 times he prayed to go into Israel. We don't know what he said in each one of the 550. But King David David HaMelech asked this request, and God granted it, which means God infused in the Psalms a power that only God can put in there. He turned it into divine music, basically. So to use an example, Havdil, if you wish, from musical notes. Someone can say, why do I have to play musical notes? I can play by ear. Shia plays great music by ear. I could also play somewhat by ear. But then I see people who play by notes. Why do you have to play by notes? It's free spirit. Interestingly, music, the thing that is associated so much with free spirit, there's no structure more structured than music. It's absolutely structured. There's only that many musical notes on the scale. Nobody can come and create a new musical note because that sound has parameters. There's only that many sounds. So the greatest genius in music will say, I have a new sound. No. They take a sound that exists, but they make it like a new sound. You could see a same person play a musical piece, and it sounds dead. Someone else comes, exactly the same piece, and it's unbelievable. It's like magic. Because the beauty of music is that it has absolute structure. These notes, exactly these notes, and not other notes, and what speed, and tempo, and the whole thing, and even the spaces between. But you can play it in infinite amount of combinations. Same song. And a person who knows who has that soul, sings the same song every time differently. And when you hear it, it touches you differently. It's not just, I heard that already. That speech. No, it's a different song, even though it's the same structure. So what God was saying, and granted to David HaMelech, which is what he was requesting, no problem. Jews will always be able to speak from their heart to me. But yes, I will give them also some type of notes, that if they use them, they have so-called a shortcut. They have a way to reach me in a deeper way, because there's no question that if you have some magic tricks or what buttons to press, it helps. It's like any shortcut. So of course you can stand in front of God and just pour out your heart and soul. And you have stories of the Baal Shem Tov, where a child who didn't know how to read, who either said kukri-ku, or played a flute, or just said aleph beis, reached the depths, pierced the heavens more than all the greatest tzaddikim through their prayers. Obviously you can do that, but at the same time there is something to be said for certain structure that helps along. So there's a power to Hebrew, and there's a power to the words. And if you study it, you can learn it. So I always tell people who are learning to pray, I say, you pray from your heart and soul. But maybe choose one or two prayers, like Shema or something else, read about it. I can help you translate it, and find a way to identify with it, because it has that collective power that's infused with it, like musical notes. So you can have both benefits. Unfortunately, what happens is that we are only left with the body, so it becomes only these mechanics, notes, and no one hears any music. So you conclude that there's no music here in the first place. That, of course, is the tragedy. So we come to, going back to the idea of Mitzrayim. So now the Jews leaving Egypt is not just something that happened 3,000 over 3,200 years ago. It's something that is happening right now. And you could say, in a nutshell, the greatest search each person has in life is what we call transcendence. Can you transcend the monotony and the routines of your life? Everybody needs transcendence. The only ones that don't need transcendence in this universe are animals and vegetables and minerals. They say, a Chassidic expression, that a behemoth, an animal, never saw heaven. So you look at sometimes with envy you can look at a cow grazing in a meadow. You go up to the mountains. For me, there are no cows hanging around in New York City. So you see them when you go to different country areas. You see a cow grazing, and I once stopped, I remember, at the side of the road, and I had to study this cow. And that means only one example of hundreds of thousands of such cows. And what's going on through this cow's mind? Sitting there grazing in a meadow, hours and hours on end, never gets bored, doesn't need therapy, is not interested in finding a better life, not interested in iPhones or iPads and so on. I think, how do you like that? You know? So, 1 second. And talking about that, I forgot to shut my phone. Okay. Yossi, what's up? You taking pictures? What is this? Oh. Pictures are allowed. Don't worry, this whole thing is video. I'm on the record. Want to hear me off the record? I have more. That's all right. Yeah. And I think the cow. So the cow is happy, content, no neurosis, and unless human beings cause it to have neurosis. But I know there's a guy who comes here once in a while. He's a veterinarian, but he's not just a regular veterinarian. He happens to be an animal therapist, and he tells me dogs in New York City are much more neurotic than in other cities. And he says it's not because of the dogs; it's of course their owners. He says there's so much tension in the city here that the dogs need a lot of therapy. So I told him, don't worry, it was once that way during the flood. They had to kill the animals too because the animals became as corrupt as the people. The people corrupted them, except the fish in the sea. So, anyway. So these animals grazing, they breed, they protect their young, they're born, they die, they hunt, they feed, whatever it is. And this is all over the world. They're right here in front of us to watch. And we have us human beings, creatures, who are constantly anxious, tense, and we're restless, and we just can't rest. Some of us dream for that type of animal bliss. I don't know how happy you'd be if you were sitting in a meadow like all day just chewing on grass, you know, and I mean physical grass. So it reminds me, as I said, that the Hasidic expression, an animal never saw heaven. That's not just a technical physiological fact. It's because human beings can see heaven. We woke up right. So sumorim enechem, we raise our eyes to heaven and we see there's something beyond us, and we search. Just look at billions of dollars went into just the curiosity. What is out in outer space? Nothing else. There was no profit to be made. The pure curiosity. As a result, many industries have been spawned in the outer space travel and outer space discoveries. Many of our industries that we have today. But that was not the intention. That was a side effect. And look how much money we spend in therapy, as I said, to try to deal with our anxieties and fears and insecurities. This little human being, 6 feet, 5 feet tall, a few pounds, few hundred pounds, 100 pounds, is so filled with tons and tons of anxiety. And this is even a regular person. I'm not even getting into if you grew up in a dysfunctional family and all the challenges that life presents itself. We're just different that we're restless. We're not satisfied with today. We've changed our habitats. As opposed to animals, they still live in the same habitats as they did forever. We have better homes. We've created better technologies, for good or for bad, but we've created medicine development. I mean, we're constantly growing. Because the human being has something that animals don't have, the need for transcendence. Transcendence means the need to get beyond the boundaries, beyond Mitzrayim. That's Yitzias Mitzrayim in simple psychological terms, transcendence. And I've shared this many times with psychologists who are not necessarily familiar with Jewish concepts, and they're blown away that this concept comes thousands of years ago from why Yitzias Mitzrayim is the most fundamental concept in Judaism. Why? That's why every generation, every day, because it's the essence of human life. It's transcendence. Now we have one part of us that needs to survive, to fill our needs, which is to eat, to sleep, to drink. Those things were similar to animals, as the Talmud says. But there's another part of us that's not satisfied with that. As I mentioned, we have a hunger. How do we satisfy that hunger to get beyond? Some do it through romance, through love, sexuality. Some through poetry, art, music, sports, or other addictions, healthy or unhealthy. I'm not even getting into how. But the human being is desperate and restless, and desperate for some relief from what Thoreau wrote is called, most people live a life of quiet desperation. Some more quiet than others. So in case you think you're alone in this, no, you're not. And different people, just because somebody doesn't look desperate doesn't mean they're not desperate. Some psychologists will describe the ambition, the drive and ambition for people to make money, to find honor, to find pleasure in this world. All comes from one thing and one thing only, the restlessness of the soul. And we sometimes associate it with something that's like sinful. You know, if a person wants to have pleasure, or has a desire, or a lust for something, we all identify with it as some type of like distraction from being connected to God. It's not true. The expression of chelas ava, the idea of having passion and love for God, doesn't mean that relationship with God is like mediocre. The people who are most passionate in history, as I said before, had an option to channel it one way or another. You think Abraham was not a passionate guy? He could probably match with any passionate person. So when you talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, is the idea of transcendence, is something that's a human need. The way the Torah understands it is the need of the soul. The soul that needs to find some relief, some release in a material existence. And that's what's called Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, the story as it goes in this chapter continues, so they finally freed themselves from there. But, you know, Mitzrayim doesn't let you go so fast. You know, your inhibitions and constraints, and all the Mitzrayim, however you want to translate, your fears, your insecurities, however you translate the personal Mitzrayim in your psychological life, doesn't just suddenly go away because you left. It will haunt you and continue to haunt you. So the Egyptians, the Mitzrayim pursue the Jews as they do pursue us today. So it's not like you're just suddenly free because you just left, and you need to constantly work on the process. So comes one more step, and because the time is short, I'm not going to go through the whole elaboration, but the way the mystics explain, and the way it's psychologically applied, the idea of Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the sea, why did it need to happen? You know, first of all, God wants to destroy the Egyptians. He could destroy them many ways. I mean, there were 10 plagues, and He could have done very easy, many ways to make sure they don't bother the Jews anymore. More importantly is, there's no sea that separates Egypt from the Promised Land. You can walk on land from both of them. Where's their sea? God had to circumvent, had to take them out of the way to bring them to a sea, and then they get stuck. It almost sounds sadistic. If He would have just let them travel, they wouldn't have a sea to contend with. Just walk and run from the Egyptians. And He brought them to a place, and suddenly they're stuck between the water here, Egyptians here. The whole thing didn't have to happen in the first place. And finally, when you look in the Medrash, it says in this chapter that not only the Red Sea or the Reed Sea parted, but all the seas in the world parted. So what's the purpose of that? What's the purpose of it? The answer is that there's a deeper story here. Again, it's not the material story, the physical story is only the symptom. The spiritual story is like this. Sea and land is what we call in modern lingo unconscious and conscious. I'll use the language of the Zohar. It says that land is called Alma Dizgalia, revealed worlds, and water is called Alma Dizkasya, concealed worlds. In our own personal lives, we also have land and water. We have the things that we're consciously aware of, like the creatures and objects on land, you can see them. And then we have things that remain concealed, engulfed in the sea of our unconscious. And that cannot be seen. Just like when you look at an ocean, you don't have any clue what's going on beneath the surface. If we didn't have cameras, and no one ever went down beneath the sea, you would never imagine what kind of complex system there is, even more complex than what's on Earth. So it's very similar to these two. That's what the Zohar says. Interesting thing, it says that when the existence began, God created the world, it says it was all covered in water. And then God had separate water and land. And when you look at water and land, you see a certain boundary. Think about it, you talk about psychologically, how are we all born? You spend 9 months submerged in water. 9 months in what's called in the embryonic fluids. You're submerged in a water-like state. That no way that you could survive on land at that stage, and vice versa. So we all begin the microcosm, Elam Kotan Zeh Adam, the microcosm of a human being begins like all of the universe. Why is that necessary to begin your life that way? So purely psychological terms, the reason is because we're going to go out into a cruel, hostile world, and you need to be armed and so-called nurtured and protected. Think of it like young children. Young children also, even when you come out of the womb and you're born, in a healthy home, you should be having 15, 20 years where you do not have to yet be thrust out into the harsh world, and you're protected. It's not the physical womb, but it's psychologically a nurturing environment. Because in this tough world, you need to be armed, you need to be prepared to get out there. So if you're a healthy parent, or you're a healthy teacher, the first thing you do is you help a person, you nurture them, and create a loving hearth, like a nest, before they have to go out and deal with the battles of life. So the same is true psychologically when a child is 9 months in the womb. It prepares them to go out there. And the truth is, the Talmud says that the embryo, the fetus, is taught the entire Torah while it's in its mother's womb. So of course any skeptic could ask, well, one second, today we have sonograms and all kinds of pregnancy tests, and you could see that there's no angel with a candle learning Chumash with the child inside, So where's this learning happening exactly? Doesn't look like a yeshiva in there. Maybe that's good. So, and the answer is very simple. Just like the body develops for 9 months, so does the soul. And this leads me also to music. Why is it that children, even newborn children, react to music? Why is it that embryos, there's tests, they've done tests, they play music. A child inside its mother's womb will make moves when it hears music. Not always, but it's been proven more than once. The question is not whether they hear the music. How do they know it's music? How do they know to react? How does a child, without any training, learning how to speak, you hear your parents speak, and you start copying it until you learn to speak. I'm not saying that's a sufficient explanation, but you could argue that that's where you learn it. To learn other behavior mechanisms and so on, you learn from your friends, your parents, teachers. Good habits, bad habits. But how does a child know where to learn music? No one ever played music for it. So the Kabbalah says the following, that when the child is in its mother's womb, it is taught music. The Torah it's taught is the music of the Torah, not the body of the Torah. Of course the child is not taught how you make a bracha or how you eat kosher. It's not relevant at that point. But the soul of the Torah that is taught to the child. And that's why we have a sense, like a barometer of truth. It's called resonance. That later in life, things will resonate. It's like saying, I heard that somewhere, I can't quite put it where. Like music. When you hear a song that touches you, even if you never heard it before, it resonates, it's natural. It's like swimming in your own waters. When you hear an idea, sometimes it resonates, sometimes it doesn't. But music has that ability. It's almost like feeling what they call resonance, means it's like touched a chord that was always there. It's as if you heard the song once. Which explains why the Talmud then says that after upon birth, we're made to forget the entire Torah we learned. Why do you teach someone something and make them forget? What's the purpose? The purpose is that consciously you're made to forget. Unconsciously you always remain embedded in you, in the water, in your unconscious, the music. And that is why we relate to it. That's why it is a language of the soul. More than words. No words in the world can capture what a song can capture. You hear a song, it's international, it's global, you don't need particular language, culture, race. Everybody can be touched by the same song. It has nothing to do with social conditioning. No matter where you grew up, no matter what background, you sing a song that's touching, you can touch and unite people from all backgrounds. That's a pretty powerful thing. Well, how many things can unite us like that? Politics can't, religion can't, our belief systems can't, our rituals can't, but the souls can because they come from a place that is united. And in water is an equalizer that unites everything. So when did they sing the song Shir Sayam? On the water. So the way the mystics explain it in Kabbalah, Chassidus, Hafach Yam Liyabasha, that once in history God wanted to bridge the unconscious and the conscious. That's why He led them there, to make a place where you could walk through the unconscious, through the water. They made the unconscious conscious and the conscious unconscious. This wasn't just a way to kill the Egyptians, and it wasn't just to show the Jews that He can make a miracle. They saw enough miracles, another miracle. There was a real message here. It was a message that you want to free yourself from your Mitzrayim, ultimately, in the fullest possible way, and really eliminate the Mitzrayim. It's not just leaving the Mitzrayim. You have to access the soul. You have to access transcendence through song and through music. And that's the tool that were given to reach that place. The Baal HaTanya writes on the Mishnah, Kol HaBali Hashir Nechnasim B'Shir V'Yetzim B'Shir, that the only way a soul can move from one place to the next is through a song. So in heaven, or even on earth, how does a soul move? Bodies, we know how a body moves. You get up on your feet and you walk. Or if you need to go farther, you have vehicles. And you have different ways to move. How does a soul move? Look, I know people who have millions of frequent flyer miles and their soul hasn't moved an inch in 30 years. And there are people who can sit in one place for hours, and you sit with them and you feel like you're traveling millions of miles in their stories and the sparkle in their eye and their energy. Because it's not the same thing. Physical movement, yeah, we know how to move around physically. A soul to move, there are people who will tell you, I go everywhere, but I'm a zombie. I'm like the walking dead or the flying dead. Because a soul doesn't move just because your body is moving. You know, I could sit here with you, and if I say the right thing, it'll touch you and move you. Just because we're sitting near each other doesn't mean you're going to be moved. There are people who love each other. They can be a million miles apart, but they can move each other just by thinking about each other. And if you don't love someone, you could sit right next to them and it won't make a difference. There won't be any movement. So movement on that level has nothing to do with physical movement. So how does a soul move? So he explains that a soul needs a song. A soul cannot move without a song. So every aliyah, every elevation of a soul goes from one level of Gan Eden to another. There always has to be a song. It can't enter without a song. And it's also actually expressed in the temple. There were 15 steps to the Azara, which correspond to the 15 Shir HaMailas. There's 15 Shir HaMailas. What does Shir HaMailas mean? The song of the elevations, of the steps. The Levites in the temple were composers, and you couldn't climb these steps without a song. It's basically saying movement cannot happen without a song. That's why song in Judaism is so vital. It's not just nice thing, entertaining, and so on. It's hand in hand with a service. The Levites would compose, the Kohanim would serve in silence. And the same thing is, today it's become, whether it's a show, cantorials, synagogues, that's all about hearing a certain cantor. It's lost necessarily. What's really supposed to be happening is that the cantor, whoever is leading this prayer, should be touching everybody's soul, and everybody should be soaring, instead of just the cantor soaring, and his prices as well. But the true meaning of song is prayer. Prayer is called sometimes Zimra, Shira. So when the Jews experienced finally that final freedom from Mitzrayim, they expressed it through a song. And a song comes from the world of water, not from the world of land. That's why it's so mysterious. There's a book, a bestseller that came out a few years ago from Dr. Oliver Sacks, the famous neurologist. He has this very fascinating books, Awakenings, The Woman Who Mistook Her Husband for a Hat, right? These type of books. He has really strange neurological phenomenon. So he wrote a book called Musicophilia. And he writes there that music is absolute mystery, but there's no question. He shows with all kinds of things how it affects Alzheimer's patients and others. And the way he puts it is that we are musically wired. We are a musical species. But he does not have an explanation why. He says he says we still don't know why. So if you just read some Kabbalistic writings, I'm thinking of writing him a letter. The reason is very simple, because the soul is music. The soul is a musical entity. That's the reason why. It's a way of connecting to transcending something beyond us. That's why it has the power to take us to a place that nothing else can take us to. So there's a lot more that can be said on this topic, but I want to just conclude on the following note. The same Baal HaTanya once said that when you have questions, when you're asked a question you don't have an answer for, you should tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you should sing a song. So, it's cute, and I've used it many times when I was stumped. Telling a story distracts people, because they have a story, and they forget, it's like a joke. And then you sing a song. But the truth is, if you think about it, it really is, what he's really saying is that there's some questions that simply can't be answered with words. Not because there isn't necessarily a rational answer, but many questions are not necessarily rational questions. You have to remember, and you have to always answer with with the same spirit of what you're asked. Many questions we ask come from a different place than pure rational. They can come from a place of anger, and the questions are a way of expressing an excuse. It can become from justification. It can become from subjectivity. Not to say the questions aren't good. The questions are always healthy, but it's important to distinguish between, let's say, a person who's looking for excuses. I don't like debates for this reason, because every debate I've ever seen always goes nowhere. Because first of all, the ego and the pride get in the way, and two smart people can just go in circles forever, And secondly, it doesn't really resolve the issue. Most people make decisions emotionally, not with intellect. I was younger once, and I used to overrate intelligence. Intelligence is a very beautiful thing, but most people do not make choices. Big choices in life are usually emotional choices. They may be informed by intelligence, but walking through the door is an emotional decision. That doesn't mean, I'm not saying in a dismissive way. A person falls in love, so to speak. Okay? So you can use your mind and make sure this is the right person for me and so on. But the decision to commit has to come from a place that's beyond logic, because logic will always say, maybe you're not sure 100%. How could you know for sure? How do you know what's going to happen tomorrow? None of us have certainty like that. It's even arrogant to be that certain. So there has to be an element, you can call it faith, intuition, just an instinct. It doesn't really matter what word you use for it, but it's definitely not a rational one. So what the Baal Tanya was saying was very profound. That when you get to the real issues in life, the deeper issues, and you just don't have words to answer, you come to a place where you've exhausted language, then you have to use another language. And the language is called a story. A story is a different language because it's a story of people like ourselves. We identify, it's not just a concept, an intellectual idea. And when that doesn't work, there's always another language, even a deeper one, it's called song. It's a song. And a song can create the openness and the warmth and the trust. Now obviously people like us that are skeptical with our armor, heavy armor and defenses up, if someone just would sing to us, we'd feel like we're being manipulated. So you can't begin with a song, so you have to, Kavyachol, dress it up in all kinds of intelligent discussions. But at the end of the day, to really pierce, sometimes what a song does, words can never do. So I thought, as appropriate to Shabbos Shira, with your permission, I would conclude with a nigun, with a song. I'm not to answer any questions that have not been answered. Just I'm in the mood of singing. So is that good enough? Do I have your permission? Yeah. So I grew up in an environment where Hasidic melody was a big part of my life, and as I said, embarked on more of the deeper mystical ideas, I realized how these songs capture very profound experiences. So I can dig into the repertoire of many different songs I can sing. I'm just thinking which one is appropriate. So whatever comes to my instinct, that's what I'll do. So I'll sing a nigun that it had an impact on me when I was going through my struggles. So they call it in the Chabad Hasidic tradition, they call it the nigun, the Poltava nigun. In Russia there was a city called Poltava, and that's where the Rav of Poltava composed the song. And it has a particular heart, it's a type of yearning. I would really say, for those that are not familiar with this type of song, they're really more like chants than songs. Not all. I mean, you could sing them, but they're more meditative and chanting type. So we'll sing this one, okay? Niryayanaroi Yahidanayanom Niryayanoi Ayayanayanayanayanayanayanam Niryayanayanayanayanayanay Ayayanayanayanayanayanayanam Niryayanayanayanay Ayayanayanay Ayanayanam Niryayanaroi Niryayanaroi Ayadadanayanam Ayanayananayanay Ayanayanay Ayadadanayanam Niryayanayanayanayanayanam Niryayanayanayanay
When Pavarotti once did a rendition of "The Lord Is My Shepherd," the Tehillim Hashem Roi, Psalms 23. So after he finished, he had a standing ovation, not as powerful as yours, but but he had a standing ovation, and yes, and after everyone sat down, one old Jew remained standing, and he did his version of Shem Rai, and the whole place started crying instead of no applause, crying. So later Pavarotti asked him, the Jew, he said, "Why was it when I did it they applauded, and when you did it they cried?" He said, "Because you may know the psalm, but I know the shepherd." So if I had you crying, then I would have been. It's all right. We could have both. Okay, yeah. You want me to sing it again? Anyway, I want to wish everybody. Huh? I want to wish everybody a week of song and melody, and you should discover the soul in your life, and that will help you soar. Remember, all maladies and all problems come from the gravitational pull of material, and it is music that helps us defy gravity, and that's why it can help the soul, which is like the flame. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, a flame. What a music is to sound, a flame is to light, is to space. So you have the same idea in a flame. So I wish you all, as I said, a singing week, and that doesn't mean you should just walk around singing everywhere. People may think something's weird, but singing inside doesn't hurt. And those people who really are soulful people are always singing.
So may you experience that and at least meet people that are that way. We all know other types that are basically pulling us the other direction. So, and it's an honor and pleasure to speak to you. And may we continue. Tomorrow night, Philip will not be giving his class. I will give tomorrow. Next Wednesday, we continue our journey. And I wish everybody a great week. And please stay in touch. If you haven't left your email, that's a way we can communicate. And let me leave you your emails here so we can stay in touch. Okay, good night.